Hey everybody, it's John Pollock, and this is Fight News Now. Coming up over the next hour, we're going to be chatting about Saturday's main event involving light heavyweights Ryan Bader and Anthony Rumble Johnson. We'll also be discussing with Robin Black and John Ramdine all of the changes to UFC 196. It's now going to be a free televised card headlined by Stephen Thompson and former welterweight champion Johnny Hendricks. All that, and the UFC is aiming to put together some very interesting fights for April. We'll be discussing all that and more coming up over the next hour. Here with Robin Black and John Ramdine, and UFC 196 officially has a new home. It's going to be on FS1 instead of going on pay-per-view. So a massive change that the UFC has to make. I think people just look at this, oh, simple solution. This is a very complex decision that has a lot of moving parts behind the scenes. But this was a card that they tried to put in a new main event with the loss of Fabricio Verdum and Cain Velasquez. John Jones was being floated out there to come up to heavyweight. You had Nate Diaz wanting to fight Anthony Pettis. Some great options on paper, but unfortunately not being able to get everyone's names on paper. So we've got Johnny Hendricks and Stephen Thompson, and this is a good main event for television. You could not have, I feel, done very well on pay-per-view with this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Considering the fact that not a lot of people right now understand who the heavyweight champion is. It's really, when you look at what's kind of happened over the last number of years with the heavyweight division, I think that Fabricio Verdum is just not a guy that resonates with the audience. I think you're still in the building stages. You're trying to set him apart from the rest of the crowd, but can you do that? Because I know a lot of people believe that Cain Velasquez was going to be the guy to dethrone the current champion. But to have this fight on free television, it's great for the fans because it's a meaningful fight. You have the former welterweight champion against this crazy karateka, does spinning attacks. Really, really fun to watch. And then you look at some of the other fights on the card as well. Benavidez, Zach Makovsky. So it's going to be a great night for the fans.
I do love the fight. It's an incredibly meaningful fight, too. Johnny Hendricks was the champion. And he beat Robbie Lawler and then lost to Robbie Lawler. Then there was a weight issue. People, big outcry. I called him a fat jerk. I'm sorry.
He's got a nutritionist
Didn't mean to do that. That's rude. That's out of line. He's not a jerk. But the fight itself, when you look at it, I love it. And it's for a lot of reasons. Very interesting for me, the way that Stephen Thompson's going to fight against a big, strong southpaw. So Thompson's got his right hand forward. You're Johnny Hendricks. You're Johnny. I'm Thompson. Yeah. You're Hendricks. I want to be Thompson. And he's got
calling him a jerk?
No.
That is what he's calling me.
No, sorry. You're fat. No, so he's got his left hand forward. Normally, he's against a guy with his left hand forward, so he throws his hook kick over here. He brings his right kick over top, the kick to the body. But against Hendricks, it's right hand forward versus right hand forward. Changes that whole game that he's built. Now, does he just use that game against an orthodox fighter, and he can do the exact same thing in reverse from the left-handed stance against the southpaw? I don't know, but that's going to be really, really fun to see. Same time, Hendricks, man, can take you down in a moment, that's the test for this kid. It's meaningful because Hendricks had his ups and his downs, and he wants to come back, and he wants to fight for the title, and he wants to prove himself once again. This is the kind of fight you can do it. But for this young upstart who's kind of quietly worked his way up, beat guys like Pat Cote and Jake Ellenberger, this is the kind of fight that puts you one step away from fighting for the title.
Unfortunately, though, for Stephen Thompson, Johnny Hendricks has that one tool, just like Stephen Thompson has his crazy karate background that's very difficult to train for. Johnny Hendricks has this level of wrestling that's going to be difficult for Stephen Thompson to train for. In addition to that, does he really want to be standing on one leg, throwing kicks with Johnny Hendricks ready to barrel him over?
Hey, man, Ellenberger came into that fight thinking, I'll just take this kid down. And mobility is the first line of defense. You know, often people will say, how's the guy's takedown defense? And what they're talking about is when a guy's on your hips, what do you do and what can you do? If Hendricks is on your hips, you're already screwed. The real defense comes from being positioned in a place where he doesn't have a straight line to you. And so from a technical standpoint, this is a super cool fight. I get that it's hard to ask people to spend $60 to pay for something where they don't know Thompson as well, and Hendricks is on an up and down swing. But from a technical standpoint, super cool fight.
One fighter that links these two together is Matt Brown, who we last saw Johnny Hendricks against last March, and Johnny Hendricks looked really good in that fight, getting his weight down, and he was able to essentially shut down Matt Brown's striking. Matt Brown was the same guy that beat Stephen Thompson way back in 2012. That was a very tough fight to throw Stephen Thompson towards at that point in time, back in April of 2012. And since that fight, Stephen Thompson has always been told about his wrestling. I mean, that certainly registers with the guy. You know how much he has trained with Chris Weidman. I'm curious to see how much he can defend the wrestling of Johnny Hendricks. He is obviously not going to out-wrestle anybody, the caliber of Johnny Hendricks. But I think that Stephen Thompson here, this is somebody that, on paper, you look at the credentials of Johnny Hendricks. I think with Stephen Thompson, we should be keeping a big eye towards in terms of where his growth is going to be and preparing for this fight with Johnny Hendricks.
Yeah, well, I think you just look at the Carlos Condit fight. Everybody said, oh, there's no way Carlos Condit's going to be able to stop Johnny Hendricks' takedown. And for the most part, Johnny Hendricks did get a number of takedowns. But Carlos Condit stopped a number of those takedowns, and he managed to get up a number of times. And I think that'll
Same with Robbie Lawler against
exactly.
Johnny Hendricks.
But I mean, Robbie Lawler essentially does have a wrestling background. I mean, the guy, you go into that Miletich camp when you're 16, 15 years old, and Matt Hughes and Pat Miletich and all of those guys in Iowa are constantly shooting on you, making you wrestle. So despite the fact that Robbie Lawler knocks people out, he does have a wrestling background. I just look at it, Carlos Condit, and to me, the Stephen Thompson fight, I think, is going to be similar to that, where he is going to be able to stop takedowns, and he is going to be able to avoid things, and if he does get taken down, he'll get back up and try to punish Johnny Hendricks, but I think Johnny Hendricks will have the most success. And is it 3 rounds or 5 rounds now?
You know, that's a good question, actually. There was talk that Hendricks was willing to do 5 rounds, but I haven't heard that official as of the time we're having this conversation. But last thought on weight, and the reason I feel suspect sometimes if we start pointing it out, journalists and analysts and fans, of course you have the right to say and point out whatever you want, but these things affect people. There's a psychology to weight. A guy like Johnny Hendricks has a lifetime of being able to achieve weight as a wrestler. There's a psychological stress that happens when you start to doubt it, you fear it, you question your physiological reactions to the cut, and it starts being psychological. And I think that was probably more the issue than anything. You know, then you're trying to explain it away and you feel a little bit embarrassed or hurt by it. If he's beaten that psychology, this is a proud, hard wrestling guy who's grown up in a lifetime of wrestling. He should be able to make this weight, no problem. I bet he'll have that licked.
2 fights that are not confirmed yet for April but are being worked up on are, first we have a light heavyweight fight with Rashad Evans and Mauricio Shogun Rua, and then at 155 pounds, the potential return of Khabib Nurmagomedov, who has been out for 2 years by that point, against Tony Ferguson, who had already been announced for a rematch with Michael Johnson. So with Tony Ferguson's case here, I mean, he's somewhat rolling the dice here that Nurmagomedov will be ready for April, and he's giving up this fight with Michael Johnson March the 5th, if in fact this fight is confirmed. But it's a great fight at lightweight involving 2 contenders that the winner of that fight positions themselves very highly. Nurmagomedov with a win over the current champion, and Tony Ferguson. I mean, what an incredible streak this guy's
Yeah,
on.
that's if Tony Ferguson, clearly the goal is to how do I get myself into title contention? How do I get that crack at 155-pound gold? And the Eagle is the guy that you need to beat if you want to get to considered to fight for the title, because as much as Michael Johnson's a contender, we've seen what happened with him in the Nathan Diaz fight, lost on paper to Dariush. So even though that's a good win for Tony Ferguson, this, if he manages to get a victory over the Russian, this is the better win, and he'll probably get a shot at gold if he does manage to get a victory.
Yeah, Tony Ferguson's one of my guys. He's one of my Robin Black All-Black team, you know? I love this guy for a lot of reasons. It's also a very smart time for him to go fight this fight. I think this is a fight he can win regardless because he's very different. You're not just dealing with Khabib gets to your back really well. Tony's going to be cool with that. He's going to have tools and tricks for jamming his elbow in and rotating out of that, so he can handle that. But also, if you're going to fight Khabib, part of the art of war is figuring out how to fight somebody, when to fight somebody, what advantages you may have.
2 years off.
Yeah, 2 years off is great for a lot of reasons, and one is timing is a part of Khabib's thing. His timing is very different. He uses that. The cool thing about that sambo, that combat sambo, is their ability to get in and strike to get in. They do it in off times and off rhythms. This guy's timing has to be off, even if it's 2% or 5%. It's got to be off without those 2 years. Perfect time for Tony to go in and do this.
Last thing, just going back to the changes at UFC 196. What happens now with this heavyweight title, and is Cain Velasquez still in line for that rematch?
I think it's the same right now. I think all parties, because of what has transpired, Cain is out, Verdum is out, They'll have that fight again when both guys are ready to go. And, depending on what happens in that fight, because I know the UFC, everybody's saying, Stipe's the next guy. Well, what happens if Kane manages to get his title back? Do we see another fight between him and Verdum? So it all depends. But I think that fight's going to go down, and then Stipe will probably get the winner.
My wife forces me to watch Grey's Anatomy, and so I've kind of pictured these guys all laying in the hospital together, and it's like whichever one is out first. Okay, so you're out, so whoever else is going to be out next, that's who you're going to fight. I think it sounds like Verdum will be getting off. Dr. Dreamy will have him all ready, and he'll be ready. So whichever one of the other two is ready to go will be the one who gets it.
All right, I hear an awful cover song playing in my ears. We're going to be back on Thursday night chatting about Anthony Johnson, Ryan Bader, which is going down Saturday night in Newark, New Jersey, as will Josh Barnett and Ben Rothwell. Tune in to our 1-hour preview show Thursday night at 6 p.m. Eastern.